Good afternoon, and thanks again for joining us here today. I'm Carolina Albernaz. I'm Director of Business Development and Operations at the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce here in Toronto. And we're here today with our partners, the Trade Commissioners at the Consulate of Canada in São Paulo, and Ambassador Jennifer May, Ambassador of Canada in Brazil, to set up the stage for next week when you'll all be attending Collision from Home conference. So I'd like to start by thanking Global Affairs and the Trade Commissioners, as well as Apex Brazil and the Consulate General of Brazil in Toronto for their partnership in recruiting Brazilian companies to attend this conference. We're very pleased to announce that we were able to have over 100 Brazilian companies participating, and it's one of the largest country delegations at the conference. I would like to ask Ambassador Jennifer May to do the opening remarks. So thank you, everyone, and Ambassador, please.
Well, thank you very, very much. Je suis vraiment ravie d'être ici avec vous, même si c'est virtuellement. Boa tarde de Brasília. It's really fantastic to be here at this really, really innovative event today. And I think COVID is really making us flex our muscles and try new things. And I think that what I've seen, that it's a fantastic program that's been put together for the next couple of days for participants, really bringing together specialists on doing business in Canada, on immigration, on all of the tips and tricks. And really also, I think one of the key things, as Carolina mentioned, are the partnerships. And this is a really fantastic example of a partnership with, for us as the Government of Canada and Brazil, with the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, the Consulate General of Brazil in Toronto as well, and Apex Brazil. And I think that Carolina has been a little bit too modest. The information I have is that the Brazilian delegation is over 140 companies and is in fact the largest international delegation. So I think that really speaks for itself in terms of the vibrancy of this relationship and also of the incredible interest. This is, I think the other thing that these crazy times are telling us is that the answers are not going to be to the various challenges, whether they're political, economic, or social, that COVID has put on the table, that they're not going to be just found within one country's borders. That the internationalization, whether it's in terms of supply chains and procuring really necessary supplies, or keeping the world economy moving in these turbulent times, all of this requires really strong international partnerships. And again, this is where I think that your interest today is showing that this kind of global thinking that you have. I think that one of the questions that we have to answer, and that I hope over the next 2 days will become crystal clear, is why Canada? Why, as a Brazilian company, is Canada a place of interest? And this is where I think it's useful not just to hear from us as the Government of Canada. Of course, we think that we're a great place, and we'll give you all the data that's going to support that, but really also to listen to other Brazilian companies that have been active and that are active in Canada, and also to the Brazilian Consulate General in Toronto that have experience with seeing how it works and how it really comes together in the end. From my perspective, speaking as a Canadian and as Canada's ambassador in Brazil, I can say that I have heard from many, many Brazilians that they find Canada a fantastic place to live and work. This is not just, when you're looking at an investment, it's not just about the business fundamentals, and we can walk you through that for each of your companies, absolutely. But it's also, at the end of the day, it's a place you're going to be spending a lot of time. And I think you will find that Canadians are very warm and welcoming, and that it complements very well with the Brazilian society and culture, and that both you and your teams will find spending time in Canada, whether it's on business trips or really coming and setting up an operation, you'll find that Canada is very much a welcoming place. And as I said, I say that not because I'm a Canadian, but I say that because a lot of Brazilians have told me this. I think the other thing that also makes it very comfortable for Brazilians is that, like Brazil, it's a continental-sized country with an incredible diversity, and that if you have a chance to go to Toronto, you can have Chinese dim sum for breakfast, have a Greek lunch, and then head on over somewhere else for a Japanese dinner or Indian food or whatever it is. And of course, Brazilian churrasco too. It's all there. The city of Toronto, which is my hometown as well, has over 50% of the population is born outside of Canada. This is the most diverse city in the world, and what I would say is the most diverse country in the world. So it's then therefore not surprising, I would say, that international trade, that this openness extends beyond the social, and then it goes into our relationships in terms of commerce. Many of you may know that we are in the process right now of negotiating with Mercosur a brand new free trade agreement. This is quite possibly going to be one of the first major trade agreements that is signed and finalized in the post-COVID environment. And it will certainly send a signal in terms of the continued openness of our country to these agreements. But we've already got, I think we're the only G7 country that has trade agreements with every other G7 country. We have a renewed trade agreement with the United States and Mexico. We're part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We've got agreements with many other parts of the world, including Europe, with our comprehensive economic and trade agreement with the EU. This is a country that is really, we're not just talking about trying to open borders and create stronger trading relationships, but we've really, really been investing in this. Over the next 2 days, today and tomorrow, you're going to have a chance to hear from 6 Canadian cities, and you'll get a sense also, much like Brazil, of the different types of regions, their economic profiles, their priorities, and the types of benefits and services that they can offer. And I think often, if you're looking at Canada, given our size, one of the first questions is often where to go. And I think this will hopefully help to give you a sense of where you can find the best fit for your particular business. But I can say that it's unlikely that there's somewhere in Canada that isn't the right place for you. And we'll help you through that. The Trade Commissioner Service and Lise Racicot will be speaking after. We're here to help you throughout. We can connect you with the right people in Canada, and we're here to understand your business and what your needs are so that we can help you find the right spot. Finally, the last thing that I would like to say is that we are here from start to finish for you. That I know my team across Brazil, whether it's our immigration section, whether it's our trade and investment section, whether potentially down the road, the consular section supporting Canadians, all of that, we're here to help in any way, shape that we can. Because really at the end of the day, your success is our success. And that's really what's going to put a smile on all of our faces. So I hope you have a fantastic program, and I hope that you come out of this with a sense of the opportunities in Canada, but probably most importantly, with a sense of who to contact to make next steps and to ask those questions that I hope will be here afterwards. There's no way we can answer it all now, but the main thing I hope that you come away with is a sense of who we are and how we're here to help you. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for the words. And I'm really happy to see that we actually are the largest delegation, because I think that was kind of, we're against China. So I'm happy to see that we prevailed. So I would like to ask now Elise Racicot, Senior Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner at the Canadian Consulate in São Paulo, to say a few words about internationalizing your company to Canada. Elise, please.
Thanks, Carolina. I will do this in English because I was asked to do this, but I see there's a lot of Brazilian participants. So if there are any questions or things you'd like me to clarify in Portuguese, I'm more than happy to do that. My notes are actually in Portuguese, so sometimes I might stumble a little bit, and I hope you'll give me the benefit of the doubt. The first thing I wanted to mention is the importance, and the ambassador already alluded to that, but the importance of the Canada-Brazil relationship as a good foundation for what we hope is going to be more for investment from Brazil coming into the country for companies who are looking to internationalize from Brazil and are trying to find where the right spot is. We have an important presence. And that includes on the economic side, so the team that I work with some of the colleagues actually also directly involved on the direct investment side that most of you probably already know somehow. So Monica McDonough and Marcelo Tavares were here both today, but also the full team that we have across our 6 offices in Brazil. We also have a really strong immigration team. These days, travel and all of that has been complicated by the pandemic, of course, but we continue to work really hard to make sure that the work that's been done in the past will continue to prevail once we get into a better situation where with more flights and more flexibility for the borders to open again. But these 2 tools are really important to the economic relationship. And so just by comparison, the team that we have across our 6 offices in Brazil is about the same size as the team that we have in countries like France or the UK. So really showing the importance that Canada gives to a country like Brazil in terms of our trade and investment relationship. It's been also a long time that we've been here. Some of you might not know, but Carolina, I think you mentioned the BCCC existed for 47 years, if I'm correct. Well, we've been having Government of Canada representation in Brazil for over 75. So we're quite happy to say that we're there for the long term and that we want this relationship to be built on that strong foundation. This year also is the 10th anniversary of a bilateral agreement, a really special one that we have with Brazil. Canada, with really few countries, have a science, technology, and innovation agreement, and Brazil is one of them. So this is something that we're really happy about. One of the anniversary, one of the good news of 2020, I guess, is that it's been 10 years that we have this bilateral agreement. Which has a lot of work in terms of bringing together our innovation ecosystems, but also more directly in terms of supporting projects that are led by SMEs on both the Brazilian and the Canadian side to do joint innovation development for commercial purposes. So I just wanted to put it out there because I know most of the companies interested in participating in Collision are innovators or interested in the subject. So this is something that's really important to us. The ambassador has already mentioned the negotiations with Mercosur. I won't get too much into this, but just to say this is also something that shows the importance of the relationship and how we want to get closer together. And maybe the most important part of the relationship, and in my view anyway, and as we say in Portuguese, maybe I'm suspeita para falar because I'm married to a Brazilian, but it's the importance of the people-to-people relationships. There hasn't been in the past a huge Brazilian community as part of the diversity that the ambassador referred to, that's really typical of Canada. But in the last, I'd say 10 or even 15 years, there's been a steadily growing number of students and workers that have come to contribute to the Canadian project. And this has been really tremendous in terms of bringing closer together our 2 nations. At the end of the day, we're all people. So when we do have an understanding through someone else, maybe a friend or a neighbor or a cousin, of what it means to be in Canada, what Canada means to them, I think suddenly it makes it easier for people to understand each other and reach out. So just wanted to mention that as well. In terms of trade and investment, Brazil is among the large partners of Canada. There's still room to grow, but definitely an important partner for us. Right after, of course, the US and Mexico are really integrated with Canada, but right after the North American partnership, Brazil comes in next. Not only in terms of trade, but in terms of the investment that we have bilaterally, which is actually much larger even than the size of our trade. When we think about the bilateral trade that we have, it's about 7.7 Canadian billion dollars. in a year. So that's for 2019. We can add to that as well the services, which are steadily growing as well. And most of it, like the exports are a little bit lower from Canada to Brazil than the other way around. So we import a little bit more from Brazil than Brazil does from Canada. But the investments are, as I said, are really the part that I think are the most interesting, because it's more than double that. It's 14 billion. 0.1 in terms of Canadian investment in Brazil in the last stats that we have, and 14.6 in terms of the Brazilian investment in Canada. So some of those are made up of SMEs who are, coming with maybe smaller projects and growing or scaling as they go. But there's also a lot of key investment pieces that are making those number, which include on the Canadian investment things that are quite diversified, that include a lot of telecommunication, automotive, infrastructure, agriculture, and mining, of course. And on the other side, well, mining, of course, again, we're two mining nations, so that kind of makes sense. But also in steel, in beverages, so Ambev, for example, and software, and in many other sectors with smaller investment that become more and more diversified. And why is that? Well, there are competitive advantages that Canada has to offer, and the ambassador mentioned, that it's a nice place to live and work because of its diversity and inclusion. But I think in this world that we are in today, there remains maybe not that many places that have that open immigration policies and that open multicultural culture of inclusion. And that is definitely something that we hear a lot from investors as a competitive advantage. It's much easier, for instance, for someone who decides to make an investment in Montreal or Toronto or Waterloo, as we're going to be hearing today, then sometimes to do that in the Valley, for instance, in the US, in terms of how do I send some of my team members there to establish the company, what will be their immigration status, can they bring their family, how long is that going to take? In Canada, I think we're really competitive in that sense. So that's definitely an advantage, especially for knowledge-based innovative companies that need to have a part of their team often move elsewhere if they want to establish a presence. There's also, even though, and I'll talk a little bit about what's happening around COVID in Canada, just I'll mention that afterwards, but generally speaking, there's been a really stable economic growth in Canada, with of course, that's going to be affected by the current situation like all other economies, but I think that stability will help make sure that we get out of this in a better way. We also have a lot of incentives, policy for incentives and benefits for the corporate sector, especially for innovation and research and development. You'll learn more about that in the coming days, but this is definitely a big advantage if you have a lot of people on your staff that are like PhDs or master degrees, and they need to do research as part of their work. There's a lot of really competitive incentives that Canada, provinces and cities have to offer, but definitely at the federal level, I think we're offering some really good tools. There is also what is still a really competitive rate in terms of the corporate tax rate. So another advantage. And a lot of policies to support innovation, and you'll probably hear a little bit more about that, but like in the coming days. But for example, the Canadian superclusters, for those who haven't heard, these are initiatives that bring together big corporation, SMEs, and research and development to basically scale some capacity in some key industries of the future. So whether it's in artificial intelligence or digital or advanced manufacturing, there are different options there, but definitely if your company is active in one of those, there's a lot of drive and a lot of emphasis and focus on these themes, and that can definitely be a good help in terms of having that ecosystem ready to support you. Also, there's a lot of free support from the Canadian government, and that's where I do a little bit my pitch for my commercial and investment team. I guess we're part of that free support of the government. Not only, we have this trade commissioners team across Brazil that I mentioned that can already help you as a potential investor or a company who's looking to internationalize or develop partnerships with Canadian companies. But also, if you become a Canadian company, then you also have our service to help you export in other markets around the world. So an advantage to know, given we have actually people in 160 cities around the world, and basically we're a bit of a marketing arm for Canadian companies who want to develop and diversify into new markets. So just know as well that once you become a Canadian company and you start to bring value to the Canadian economy, you can also have access to all of those services in the same way that any other Canadian companies would. I mentioned that we have 6 offices. So just for those who are curious, we of course have the embassy in Brasilia, and of course the largest economic team is here in Sao Paulo, but we also have a team in Rio focusing mostly on energy. We have a smaller office in Belo Horizonte that focuses mostly on mining. And we have a small offices also in the south and in the northeast to cover those large territories, and that also help us on different sectors, but that also have this more of a regional approach. So we're trying to be there across the country and address the continental size of Brazil. So wherever you're located or your company is located across the country, there's a place where you can get in touch at a more local level, on top of our group of experts, including Marcelo and Monica that I mentioned, who are working on investment specifically. So I mentioned the COVID situation in Canada, and I know this is something that a lot of investors have been wondering about. So I'm just going to share quickly certain elements. Of course, as I said, there's going to be effects in terms of the unemployment rate and in terms of the growth rate. I think everywhere around the world, there's no escape from that. We're also a little bit like Brazil, have been affected by the oil prices this year, but there is still a positive perspective for growth starting in 2021 based on a lot of economic analysis. Looking, for example, I have actually a nice quote here from the chief economist from Deloitte saying that it will actually need coordination and collaboration between organization, markets, and economy in general. But I think Canada has been doing this in a really positive way. And so that's why we're being positive about how we might be able to make strongly and quickly get out of this difficult time. Some of those elements of that coordination that I'm mentioning, I'm just going to go quickly through some of them. But first, the message is Canada has been open for business, even though we're in this special time. There's been a task force created for investors to help them in this moment, help them with different things. One of them is the critical supply chains, but also in terms of immigration processes, if they had like employees that were stuck somewhere or things like that, but also more generally in terms of making sure they're aware of all of the other Government of Canada tools that have been put together to help private companies respond to the crisis. These include, there's been hundreds of thousands of Canadian companies receiving in total billions of dollars of help in the last 3 or 4 months in an Herculean effort that was done. And those include different type of help, but guarantees to access more easily credit from commercial banks, co-lending, capital loan, help for continued help for research and development and in industrial innovation, support also to maintain salaries and to maintain employees in place during these difficult times, support for commercial rent, especially for those companies who didn't have revenues during a period of time, depending on the type of business, and this is for SMEs mostly. More time for people and companies to pay their taxes, so having more delay this year than any time before, so that people and companies can get back on their feet before they need to basically do their taxes. Also, a lot of support to some autonomous employees and youth, but all that to say, a lot of support generally for the private sector and for the industries across the country. And when you're an investor in Canada, you have access to all of those types of help as well. Just to maybe finish on this, you'll hear in the next few days, I had like some points on some of the key industries in Canada and whatnot, but I know the cities will be talking about that in details and telling you a lot more about about where specifically in Canada you can find that. So I'll let them do that much better than I would. But just to say some things on the, people always like to have a few tips on business culture in Canada. I think in many ways there are a lot of similarities, and we're not that different, we're human beings after all. But I think some fundamental principles that often we're told as a feedback by Brazilians who discover it first and then tell us, okay, we need to know that when we do business in Canada, are things like, the focus on business and punctuality and being objective. So relationships are also important, but, you need to make sure that the business fundamentals and all that are the main focus. The immigration policy, as I mentioned, that are more flexible. So that's something that's a really positive point for Canada, but that's also part of our way of doing business, and embracing diversity and inclusion. That's really important. The importance, as well as things like responsible business conduct, corporate social responsibility, and environment are really strong in Canada. So that's also something that's good to know when you want to start doing business there and establish a business. So I know I'm taking too much time, and there's a really full pack presentations today. I'll be also with you throughout the presentations tomorrow as well. So I'm here if there is any questions or comments later, but I think at this point I'll let my other colleagues get their time to speak and to talk about specifically what their city has to offer. But I just want to thank once more BCCC and all of the other partners that have been involved in making this possible. Thank you so much.